Dear colleagues, would you please take your seats so that we can start? We have a tight schedule to deal with all the issues that are on our agenda today. So I remind everybody that we should also stick to the speaking times. The next item of business on the agenda is a debate under urgent procedure on legal and humanitarian rights aspects of the Russian Federation aggression against Ukraine, presented by Mr. Damien Cotier on behalf of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights. Madam Oleksandra Matviichuk, head of the Center of Civil Liberties, who I welcome very much, and 2022 Nobel Peace Prize laureate, will also make a statement at the beginning of the debate. In order to finish by 12 noon, when the Prime Minister of Iceland, representing the country that is now chairing the Council of Europe, I will have to interrupt the list of speakers at about 11:40 to allow time for the reply and the vote on the draft resolution. Now, first I call Mr. Damien Cotier, rapporteur. You have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes at the end of the debate. Damien.
Merci.
Thank you, President. Marija was 15 years old. She was head prefect at her school. She was interested in music. She liked to grow flowers. And dance performances thrilled her with their beauty and grace. Marija died on the 14th of January in Dnipro, with numerous other civilians torn from life and her family by a missile which gutted their building. We've all seen these unbearable images. Marija should not have died. She should have been protected by this document, or rather by its successors. This document is a copy of the original First Geneva Convention of 1864. The Geneva Conventions exist to provide a grain of humanity in the hell of war. It was the will of governments who've negotiated and signed them. My country, Switzerland, is proud of these to be the depository fixing the rules of war to protect the civilian populations, hospitals, schools, humanitarian staff, injured soldiers, prisoners of war, etc. Unfortunately, these universally ratified conventions only seem to be a mere piece of paper for some. There have been countless Russian attacks against the civilian population. And I know that members of this assembly went in June to Bucha, Irpin and Kiev. Together we've seen for our own eyes the huge damage wrought in residential areas by mortars, or traces of summary executions of civilians carried out on unarmed civilians in the streets. Ms. Matviichuk, whose organization is the Nobel Peace Prize winner, will shortly give us further testimony. Thank you, Madam, for being with us here today. The report quotes the documentation of international organizations such as the OSCE's Moscow Mechanism, the United Nations Independent Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine, or the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights. But we note sadly as well that there are more and more elements which would tend to show that the official Russian rhetoric puts forward elements which are characteristic of a public incitement to genocide, or reveal an intention to perpetrate genocide. It's important to mention the existence of this proof and to remind states parties to the Convention on Genocide that if they're aware of such a serious risk of genocide, they bear the obligation, President, of preventing it. President, dear colleagues, this report suggests that member states give greater support to the inquiries of the ICC and the General Prosecutor of Ukraine by strengthening their capacity in providing resources and expertise, notably, but also not just, but also in regards to sexual violence. The authorities must also investigate all allegations of crimes, including those committed by their own forces, as they are obliged to. Our Assembly must also remind once again the Russian leaders of their international obligations by urging them immediately to cease this conflict and the serious breaches of international law. And we also to remind the government of Belarus to stop aiding these crimes. President Viktor was a vivacious 30-year-old, fond of his family and his country. He was one of the best film editors in Ukraine. He loved rock music. He was a fan of electro music. On the 24th of February, he didn't hesitate. He took his wife and daughter to a safe place. Then he went to enroll in the army to defend his country. He soon became a unit commander. At the end of December, Victor was killed by an enemy artillery fire close to the front line. Victor should not have died, because this war should not have occurred. According to humanitarian law, Victor, like the other soldiers to combat, is, however, not a prohibited target. Contrary to the murder of civilians, it's not a war crime, but a consequence of the conflict itself. Yet his death remains unacceptable, because the outbreak of such a conflict is illegal according to international law and according to the United Nations Charter and many other legal documents. That's why it's crucial that not just the wars, that crimes against humanity and war crimes be pursued, but also the crime of aggression. That's to say, the decision to begin it in the first place, which is the most serious crime among all of them, because it's behind all the others. So let's be pleased that a growing number of international organizations and states support the proposal, already unanimously accepted by our Assembly in 2022, following the proposal of our colleague Potse. The Assembly was the first international body to take a decision along these lines. The Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE, then the European Parliament, then the European Commission, as well as a large number of governments, have also, in the meantime, gone along the same lines. And they believe that the International Criminal Court does not have the jurisdiction to judge crimes of aggression in the absence of the United Nations Security Council resolution. Would it be an obstacle to peace if we were to create such a court? No, quite on the contrary. I'm convinced that lasting peace can only be built if justice be done. And we have to give a clear signal to all governments so they bear it in mind in the future. Launching an illegal war has consequences, and the heavy personal consequences can be overwhelming. We don't know the exact form of this kind of court, nor its legal basis. There are various options. The important thing is that the Assembly appeals to all states, notably the heads of state and government, which will meet in May in Reykjavik at their summit, that they support the creation of a court. The exact form will have to be determined by consensus between the states, who must agree upon the role of this. And the role of the United Nations seems to us very important. And we need to remember the definition of crimes of aggression, which is in the Rome Charter. And it's important that we be consistent and that the states also ratify the Rome Statute, including Ukraine, and also the Kampala edition. Finally, Chair, we cannot have complete liability for aggression and the violations which are covered without reparation for damages. The systems for establishing state responsibility of Russia have proved insufficient because the convention no longer applies. So the Council must find other mechanisms. We would suggest an international compensation mechanism. The first stage would be an international register of damage, and then to come up with evidence and the requests. The Council of Europe has skills in this field, and I'm sure we can move forward taking practical steps. Another legal question or questions must also be adapted. So work must continue in this Assembly. But today we can send a very strong message. Marija and Victor and all the others should still be with us. There can be no lasting peace without justice.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Damien. Thank you for your words of introduction.
Or starting the debate on the legal and human rights aspects of Russian Federation aggression against Ukraine, it is an honor for me to give the floor first to the head of the Center of Civil Liberties and 2022 Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Madam Oleksandra Matviichuk. Dear Madam Matviichuk, dear Oleksandra, we are so happy to have you here with us today. in this Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Russia's war of aggression against your country has caused profound suffering in Ukraine, with thousands of civilians killed, injured, and countless seeking refuge elsewhere in the country or elsewhere in Europe. This night, when we were sleeping, citizens in Ukraine were alarmed by a new wave of attacks and new places of destruction were created in this war of aggression. New crimes were committed. Dear Oleksandra, you and your Center of Civil Liberties are making an outstanding effort to document these war crimes, human rights abuses and abuse of power, demonstrating the significance of civil society for peace and democracy. If I may, I would like to take this opportunity to recognize and acknowledge your great work, your efforts, and your personal deep commitment towards promoting human rights and democracy in Ukraine. It is for good reasons that you did receive the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022. Dear Oleksandra, your wide thoughts and your vast experience, also horrible experience in this respect, are therefore of great interest for us, especially in this debate. So I'm so happy that you are here with us today, and I'm quite sure that the colleagues are going to listen with more than great interest to your introduction before we start this debate. You have the floor, Oleksandra.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a human rights defender, and I have been documenting war crimes in this war, which Russia started in 2014. Back then, Ukraine obtained a chance for the quick democratic transformation after the collapse of the authoritarian regime. In order to stop us on this way, Russia started this war and occupied Crimea and part of Donetsk and Lugansk regions. Because Putin is not afraid of NATO. Putin is afraid of the idea of freedom. After the large-scale invasion, we face with unprecedented amount of war crimes. Russian troops deliberately destroy residential buildings, churches, schools, hospitals, attack evacuation corridors, establish filtration camps system, organize forcible deportations, commit abductions, rapes, tortures, and murder civilians in the occupied territories. This is the conscience policy. Russia uses war crimes as methods of warfare. Russia attempts to break people's resistance and occupy the country by means of inflicting the immense pain on civilians. We document this pain. In just 10 months, our joint efforts have documented 31,000 war crimes. I interviewed hundreds of people who survived Russian captivity. They told how they were beaten, raped, electrically shocked through their genitalia, and their nails were torn away, their nails were drilled, they were compelled to write with their own blood. One lady reported how her eye was dug out with a spoon. There is no military justification for such actions. Russians did these horrific things only because they could. I ask myself the question, whom do we document all of it for? We face with accountability gap problem. The Ukrainian legal system is overloaded with an extreme amount of war crimes. But the International Criminal Court restricts its investigation to just several selected cases and has no jurisdiction over the crime of aggression in terms of Russian aggressions against Ukraine. Hence, who will provide justice for all victims of this war? I work with people who have survived hell, and I'm certain that above and beyond their ruined lives, ruined families, ruined vision of the future, these people crave to restore their trust that justice exists, even though delayed in time. It's crucial not only for Ukraine. This is not a war of two states. This is a war of two systems, authoritarianism and democracy. Putin attempts to convince the world that democracy, rule of law, and human rights are fake values. If they are genuine, why do they fail to defend anyone? Why couldn't the whole UN system stop Russian atrocities? Why do I, human rights lawyer, who has been applying the law to defend people for many years, presently have to answer the question of how to contribute to people's survivors in the occupied territories by saying, provide Ukraine with modern weaponry? Because for now, the law doesn't work, although I trust that it's temporary. In the 20th century, the civilized world made a significant step to establish law and justice. At the Nuremberg trials, war crime perpetrators were tried after the Nazi regime had collapsed. In the 21st century, we must move further. Justice must be independent from the magnitude of Putin's regime's power. We cannot wait. We must establish a special tribunal on the crime of aggression now and hold Putin, Lukashenko, and others guilty of this crime accountable. Yes, this is a courageous step, but we have one strong argument. We must do it because it's the right thing to do. The Council of Europe, as an international organization which protects democracy, rule of law, and human rights, must take the leading position in it. The values of modern civilization must be protected. And one more important point. Beside the crimes of aggression, there are other international crimes: war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. These crimes don't have to remain only in our archives and reports of the international organizations. The war has turned people into numbers. The scale of war crime grows so large that it's become impossible to recognize all the stories. But I will tell you one. Shortly after the large-scale invasion began, Alexander Shelipov, a 62-year-old civilian, was killed by the Russian military near his own house. This tragedy did receive huge media attention only because it was the first court trial after February 24th. In the court, Alexander's wife, Katrin, shared that her husband was an ordinary farmer, but he was her whole universe, and now she lost everything. And this is the key meaning of justice. We must ensure justice for all, regardless of who the victims are, their social position, the type and level of cruelty they endured, and whether the media is interested in their case. We need to return people their names, because life of each person matters. The member states of Council of Europe have to assist the legal system of Ukraine to make it capable to effectively investigate and bring to responsibility for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. We must ingrain international element into the level of national investigation and national justice. We need to create a hybrid mechanism where national investigators work together with international investigators. National judges work together with international judges. Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe should state the need to increase technical support and financing in order to strengthen the capacity of the overburdened law enforcement agencies and judicial system of Ukraine, so that in cooperation with international partners and civil society to investigate numerous international crimes and ensure justice for everyone. In order to achieve justice, it should be contributed by the International Criminal Court and European countries' domestic courts, which are able to consider many cases under the universal jurisdiction. Honorable delegates of the Parliamentary Assembly, we highly appreciate the political will expressed by many countries and international organizations to prosecute the political leadership of Russia and Belarus for the committed crime of aggression. It's time to transform this will into the decision, empowering to launch legal procedures. The fight for justice should not be limited only to the crime of aggression. We require the support of foreign professionals, judges, prosecutors, and detectives in order to properly investigate and ensure court proceeding for dozens of thousands of international crimes in compliance with the standards of justice, particularly the Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Sustainable peace, which provides freedom from fear and long perspective, it's impossible without justice. For decades, Russian troops have been committing war crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Libya, in Syria, in other countries of the world. And they enjoy impunity. Russians believe they can do whatever they want. We must break the circle of impunity, not only for Ukrainians, not only for the other people who suffered from Russian brutality, but for the people who can become the next target of Russian aggression and prevent it this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Oleksandra. And I am sure that the applause illustrates that we have heard your call to us parliamentarians representing 46 member states of the Council of Europe, that we do not only have to show support in principle, but also in practice, and you have informed us about the magnitude of the work that lies ahead in order to achieve what we all in principle say, that justice has to be done to the victims of this crime of aggression, this war of aggression of the Russian Federation in Ukraine. Thank you very much. I think this helps us in the debate that we are now going to start. We first are going to listen to the 5 speakers of the political groups. As the first speaker, our colleague Edward Leach from the United Kingdom, representing the ECDA group, will start his contribution to the debate. Edward, you have the floor.
President, it's an honour to open this debate on behalf of my group, and it's even more of an honour to follow the last speech, which was truly inspiring. It almost brought a tear to our eyes when we heard of that poor farmer. To the world he may have been a farmer, but to his family he was the universe. And this explains the appalling, emotional and cruel impact of this war. And the other phrase that we heard in that inspiring speech was that Putin, in reality, is not afraid of NATO. That is a lie. He is afraid of the concept of freedom. And that is what this Council of Europe is all about: justice and freedom and human rights. There is no doubt that there have been numerous atrocities against civilians. The United Nations Independent Monitoring Commission under Erik Mos, the independent Norwegian judge, visited many towns and villages. There's been great, egregious cruelty to civilians, including sexual violence, shooting of the head, cutting of throats. It's appalling. And those who perpetrate this war must be brought to justice, to an international independent tribunal for the crime of aggression. As we've heard, and we heard from our rapporteur at the beginning of this debate, over the last 150 years, we've tried to tame the brutality of war with mechanisms such as the Geneva Convention. But it seems that this Russian aggression has no understanding or fear of the Geneva Convention or anything else. These people must be brought to task. Of course, Europe must put it must do what it must do. It must send the tanks. It must do all it can. We in this council can't send any tanks. We only have our voice. But surely a voice is loud enough. And we have to proclaim that voice loudly. That this is an old-style war of aggression. It's not about fear of NATO or anything else. It is simply trying to recreate the Russian Empire. Well, the Russian Empire is over. The era of empires is over. The British Empire is over. The French Empire is over. The Turkish Empire is over. This is now the era of freedom and independent nations who want their own sovereignty, and that is all that the Ukraine asks for, and that is what we should give them support. So when we say long live Ukraine, we're not talking about nationalism, we're saying long live freedom and humanity. And I hope you'll forgive me if I quote Winston Churchill, who said in 1941, and this could be said of Ukraine now: humanity with all its fears, with all its hopes of future years, is hanging breathless on thy fate.
Thank you very much, Edward. Next in the debate, I call Mr. George Katrougalis from Greece, who speaks on behalf of the UEL group. George, you have the floor.
Chair, dear colleagues, recently the President of our Assembly suggested to me to read again the preamble of the statutes of our organization. There I found this remarkable phrase that it is very pertinent to what we are discussing. I quote, "Peace based upon justice and international cooperation is vital for the preservation of human society and civilization," unquote. Exactly for this reason, because peace and justice and international cooperation cannot be dissociated, we remain very skeptical for the establishment of an ad hoc tribunal which could undermine the moral authority and the legal jurisdiction of the ICC. I remind you that after the amendments of Kampala of 2010, aggression is the fourth core crime that ICC can have under its jurisdiction. But unfortunately, we have only 44 ratifications for this agreement. United Kingdom has not ratified, neither France, nor my own country, Greece. This is butter to the bread of the Russian propaganda, that the invasion is not a violation of international legality, but just an incident of the quarrel, of the dispute between the West and Russia. So, I suggest that we push our countries for the ratification of the Kampala Agreement, try to found through the General Assembly of the United Nations a way that the procedural issues that remain should be overcome. The second point of my intervention, dear colleagues, is the other thing that our statutes remind us: peace. I'm not at all a proponent of the cynical realism in international relations, but I found very interesting the recent article of Kissinger to Spectator. You must have read it. It is entitled How to Avoid Another World War. And among analogies with the current situation and the situation in the First World War, which could have ended in 1916, he suggests that it is time for a negotiated peace in Ukraine. And also, I quote, he warns against of dreams of breaking up Russia, which could unleash nuclear chaos. So, the European institutions and the European countries should also proceed with initiatives for peace. Peace, of course, respecting fully the Ukrainian sovereign rights, because peace and justice are dissociated. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Next in the debate, I call Sunna Ivarsdóttir from Iceland, and she speaks on behalf of the group of Socialists, Democrats and Greens. Sunna, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Impunity for war crimes is a driving factor for war crimes. The fact that perpetrators of war crimes very often escape justice is a big reason why war crimes are so readily committed in conflicts all over the world. And this is why we must do our very best to end impunity for war crimes. In the case of Russia's horrendous war of aggression against Ukraine, there is not only impunity for war crimes, but the terrible practice of Russian soldiers being awarded for war crimes with medals and promotions. And we have seen with our own eyes, those of us who participated in the fact-finding visit to Kiev, Irpin and Burić last year, that Russia's strategy of attack is to attack civilian targets on purpose and on a massive scale. Schools, kindergartens, hospitals, shopping malls, apartment buildings, and even playgrounds were destroyed by Russian bombs. I witnessed with my own eyes the devastation caused by this genocidal invasion. Seeing a clothes rack with what used to be clean laundry left to dry in someone's laundry room, left bare by a bomb that had opened the entire apartment. Seeing a kitchen table with coffee cups and cutlery standing on a ledge of rubble, spotting a teddy bear in the ruins left by Russian bombs, made one thing very clear to me and my colleagues, that the biggest crime of all is the war itself. That is why, dear colleagues, this report is so important, because it lays out a roadmap to justice. We must try Putin and his accomplices for the crime of aggression. We must set up a special tribunal on the crime of aggression to bring them to justice. Because to end war crimes, we must end impunity of war crimes. And to end wars, we must end impunity for the crime of all crimes against peace, the crime of aggression. Dear colleagues, I speak not only for myself, but for all of us in the Socialists, Democrats and Greens group when I ask you to support this report, with all of the important recommendations it contains, and also when I thank the rapporteur for setting before us a roadmap to justice. And on behalf of all of us in the group of Socialists, Democrats and Greens, I declare our full solidarity with the brave people of Ukraine and our strong hope for peace for your nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunna. Now in the debate, I call Madam Maria Valentina Martinez Ferro from Spain, and she speaks on behalf of the EPP group. Maria, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank and congratulate Mr. Cotier and the Secretariat for this important and excellent report about the legal and human rights aspect of this terrible war. We, as the EPP group, would like to strengthen the importance of 2 points that we have heard here this morning. The need to establish a new Nuremberg tribunal to judge the terrible crimes and provide justice and hope to all the Ukrainians. And secondly, the compensation that Russia Federation should pay for the dreadful destruction. Since 2014, Russia has been committing numerous crimes on the territory of Ukraine, but since February 2022, the scale of these crimes has become unprecedented. Bucha, Irpin, Gostomel, Burić, Borodyanka, Mariupol, Izium became cities known to everyone in the world for the horror and destruction they are suffering. We need to bring justice to those involved in committing of international crimes, including war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crime of genocide, as soon as possible. There is an unprecedented involvement of other countries in the investigation of crimes committed on the territory of Ukraine with the Joint Investigation Team. And there is also an important involvement of the International Criminal Court that unfortunately does not have the authority to investigate the crime of aggression against Ukraine. Therefore, we must take the initiative and create such a mechanism that will be able to investigate and prosecute the highest political and military leadership of the Russian Federation for committing the crime of aggression against Ukraine. Such a mechanism is the Special Tribunal for the Crime of Aggression against Ukraine. To this end, Ukraine has proposed to submit a draft resolution on the creation of such a mechanism to the UN General Assembly for consideration. The creation of this special tribunal opens a window of opportunity for that part of Russian elites who realize that Putin's regime is leading Russia into an abyss. We need a new Nuremberg trial. The second point is that Russia, the aggressor, is causing enormous destruction on the territory of Ukraine. Shattered cities, damaged environment, ecosystem, crippled economy amidst massive human losses. Therefore, there is a need to create a new and innovative compensation mechanism to collect, assess, and ultimately provide compensation for hundreds of thousands of claims against the Russian Federation for direct losses stemming from the aggressions against Ukraine. The main concept of the international compensation mechanism is the construction of a coherent system that could ensure real compensation for damages caused by aggression. Therefore, as the report stresses, we should establish the international registry of damages to record in documentary form of evidence and claims, information on losses, injuries and damages to all legal and natural persons concerned, as well as the state of Ukraine caused by Russia. Finally, we would like to welcome the decision of all the countries who have decided to continue supporting Ukraine with all the necessary means, economical, political, and of course, military. It is the right thing to do, as Oleksandra has just said. I would like to express our solidarity and gratitude to the brave Ukrainians who continue their fight for our freedom and values, the values of this Council of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marija. Sorry for interrupting you, but if we want to give as many members as possible the floor, then we have to stick to 3 minutes. Next in the debate, on last speaker on behalf of the political groups, is Mr. Erik Niels Cross from Estonia, and he speaks on behalf of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats in Europe. Erik Niels, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I would like to congratulate Damian Cotier for this very important report. We are quite pleased with the outcome. The Russian escalated war of aggression against Ukraine has lasted for almost a year, and it feels like a long time, but it's not. For anyone between Russia and Germany, this is unfortunately a regular occurrence, because there is a tradition of Russian imperial aggressive wars against its neighbors going back to at least 1918. It's at least 100 years of Russian imperial wars, and those wars have two things in common. One, they have violated international law. Two, the planners, initiators, and perpetrators of these wars have never been tried nor sentenced. There was never Nuremberg for Russian aggressive wars, and the victims of these aggressions never saw justice. There is a very sad tradition of a vicious cycle of impunity of Russian war criminals that we are still living in Europe. Be it war against Georgia in 1921 or 2008, against Finland 1939, Hungary 1956, the Baltic States 1940, the list is long. All these wars have been conducted violating international laws. All these wars have been fought in violating Geneva Conventions. And almost all of them have clearly been aggressions, violating jus ad bellum, the right to war, at least since the crime of aggression was defined in 1928. And today we again are saying, with this report and with our speeches, no more impunity for crime of aggression, no more impunity for crime of genocide, no more impunity for crimes against humanity, no more impunity for war crimes. But as the German foreign minister told us just 2 days ago, declarations are not enough. This report outlines some steps that must be taken now to make sure that the criminals in this war will be punished. We need an international special tribunal to investigate and try the crime of aggression, the mother of the war crimes. As the Nuremberg judgment says, war of aggression is not only an international crime, it is the supreme international crime, differing only from other war crimes in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole. Therefore, it's alarming that the world in 100 years has not been able to agree upon a court that would have universal jurisdiction over the crime of aggression. We need to set up a tribunal for Russian aggressors. We need to reform the ICC system and Rome Statute so that this kind of court would be there in the future. And we, in ALDE, particularly welcome the recommendation to immediately set up an ad hoc prosecutor's office for the special tribunal, even if the tribunal itself has not yet been formed. We should address this in Reykjavik. And to sum it up, the report is good. We need to keep pushing this. Freedom of Ukraine depends on victory in war.
Thank you.
Freedom of Russia depends on ending the vicious cycle of impunity. And the future of Europe depends not only on Ukrainian victory, but on the end of impunity of aggressors. Thank you.
Thank you, Erik Niels. But please, colleagues, stick to the 3 minutes. It's a matter of solidarity to get as many people involved as possible in the debate. Next in the debate, I call Mr. Darko Kavci from North Macedonia. Darko, you have the floor. Your microphone, please. The other one.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I want to send congratulations to excellent report to Mr. Cotier. Every democratic state stands in solidarity with Ukraine and continues to support the Ukrainian people. Thousands of people have been killed as a result of Russian brutal invasion of Ukraine. Civilian infrastructure, including kindergartens, schools, universities, hospitals, buildings, houses and cultural centers, are being targeted every day. The armed attack of the Russian Federation on Ukraine has led to a grave decline of the human rights in the country, with thousands of civilians killed and injured, tortured and ill treatment. 18,000 victims are documented since the beginning of the aggression. The real number of dead or injured people is much higher. There are millions of Ukrainian refugees across Europe, and almost 5 million are internally displaced. We call on Russia to immediately end the attack. This war endangers Europe, and the future of our security and our democracies depend on it. The price to pay is on every one of us. We must not tolerate the daily killing of civilians, the horrible torture, and the other violence of human rights. Russian forces are also devastating the environment in which the people are living. There are explosions and fires, endangering the air with toxic gases and threatening the safety of the nuclear reactors. The destruction of the industrial facilities is contaminating the waters and the soil with chemicals. All leaders of democracies should immediately act. This is a lesson for every one of us, and we must remember that all autocracies are dangerous and a threat to the peace. The radical extremist narratives are not to be trusted, and we should cancel right away. This is why we should act to stop every emerging dangerous opinion in every democratic society. We must act jointly and make a strategic change to ensure the future for the new generations. In the coming times, we have to strengthen the regional cooperation even more, eliminate the potential for new conflicts, and ensure the stability and the safety for all. Once again, we are standing in solidarity with Ukraine and condemn Russian unprovoked military aggression. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Darko, and sticking to the speaking time. Now in the debate, I call Mr. Emanuelis Zinkeris from Lithuania. Emanuelis.
Thank you, Tini. Dear Tini, we were first from international organizations, not only to condemn, but structurally to evaluate. After 24th of February, this terrible second wave of terror from Russian Federation against Ukraine, who is now firm candidate member of European Union. From my point of view, my question is how this organization will lead, among other international organizations, the fight against terror set up on us, on Europe, by biggest dictatorship in the world. So, what to do? Damian, thank you for your report, and I was glad to initiate on the beginning motion of resolution, if you remember, and I'm very glad that your efforts were so scrupulous. But we should be one step ahead. Yesterday, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany spoke that all credentials, Europe and even the European Union will shift to this organization for evaluation of the next steps. So, do we should assemble in Reykjavik, in the country who was first to recognize independence of the Baltic countries, Iceland, in the cradle of democracy like Iceland, only to say what we think or to settle institutions? The institutions should be settled. And of course, Tini, you will ask me that that's only Europe. It's not Africa, it's not Latin America, it's not enough voices for like-minded countries to establish international tribunal to evaluate all those levels of war of aggression and other levels, and to go ahead. But the finances should be set. 2 years ago, somebody raised the question that Russia will not pay contribution to European Union budget. I'm sorry. Shame of those who raised the question. Is the question, from our side, is the question not what is in the head of Mr. Putin in how to avoid the Third World War and nuclear bombing. Our question is how to defend the democratic world and how to cement that. How to cement democratic world together, and Council of Europe should be an organization going ahead with this cementation in the world if United Nations organizations are failing. Tini, allow me to... yes, Tini, allow me to show the sound.
We now have passed the 3 minutes. Everybody will now have 3 minutes. Next in the debate, I call Madam Larisa Bilosev from Ukraine. You have the floor, Larisa.
Dear Mr. President, dear colleagues, I would like to commend Rapporteur Mr. Damian Cotier for this excellent report, as it is of utmost importance at the time when already 11 months Putin is destroying with impunity an entire state in Europe in front of the eyes of the civilized world, trying to wipe off the face of the earth's Ukrainian nation, violating, I would say, raping the international law in most perverted manner. I am convinced that this report will for sure encourage and send a clear message to the international community that perpetrators of war crimes and crimes against humanity, crime of aggression, can be and will be held accountable. Thank you, Damian, for enormous work that you have done, not only by preparing this report, but also that on April, together with 10 of your colleagues of ad hoc subcommittee, made a brave fact-finding mission to Ukraine, thoroughly gathering information from Ukrainian authorities on crimes committed by Russians in order to focus on system of accountability for the crime. I remember as we spent very tough and very busy day meeting with prosecutor generals, with the authorities, visiting Bucha, Irpin, and this time General Prosecutor reported to you about 20,000 war crimes committed by the Russian occupiers. I must inform you, today, after 9 months after you visit, this number increased by 4 times. Ukraine recorded already 80,000 crimes, including the murder of more than 9,000 civilians, including murder of 453 children, and this is just the tip of iceberg. The aggressor still consistently continues to cause new destructions on the territory of my country. Our land is literally bleeding. Every day, the best people of our country give up their life to protect our land. Civilians are dying, and we are still in the stage of discussion and resolutions, but not concrete deeds, and actions on special international courts and reparations from the Russian frozen funds. But we need not only words, but deeds. So far, the proposals to create a special tribunal for aggression has received the support first in the PACE, then in the European Parliament, the European Commission, Parliamentary Assembly of the NATO. But let's give up words in favor of deeds, finally. Today, Ukrainians are simply killed because they are Ukrainians. Each day, more and more young people give their lives to protect our sovereignty and freedom. You don't even imagine how, for me, as a majoritarian, hard to go to funerals on my constituency and to see very young, brave, best people dead. How people, local communities bend their knees, meeting funerals, cars from the front, to see the whole universe of the families being ruined forever. We are grateful to our allies for support. We need your support and weaponry to stop the destruction of Ukraine. Putin's regime must pay a fair price for bringing war to Europe.
Thank you. Thank you, Larisa. Next speaker is Mr. Erkan Gadirli from Azerbaijan. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, I feel very proud to be part of this organization at this particular time of the history, because I see how unanimous we are and how full-heartedly we support Ukraine. Be it committee meetings or plenary sessions, all the resolutions, reports and discussions were, I saw the unanimity. And this particular report was also unanimously adopted in the legal committee, which I'm also a proudly member of. And I'm very grateful to our chairman, who happens to be the rapporteur, and who also led our team in our visit to Kiev, Bucha, Irpin. But I can't help to mention one particular point. Had this organization or international community at large paid enough attention and took all necessary steps with regard to occupation of territories of Azerbaijan, Georgia and Moldova, the war against Ukraine probably wouldn't have happened. The international community paved the way for Russian aggression by being not attentive enough to previous facts of occupation of member states of this great organization. This report is excellent. We discussed it at length in our committee. By saying at length, I do not mean to imply that there were some disputes or arguments or disagreements. No, because it is a legal report, it requires precision, concretizations, detailizations. So that is why we had to be careful when we were choosing terms. These reports focus mainly on the establishment of an ad hoc tribunal to investigate the crime of aggression, which nowadays is impossible to do in the ICC, because Russia is not a member of ICC, and the Security Council of the United Nations cannot refer this crime to the ICC, because we all know that Russia is going to veto it. Again, without taking much of your time, and as you recommended to save time for other speakers, I've finished my words by fully supporting this report, and I'm sure that this report will also be unanimously adopted. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Erkin. Now we are going to listen to Madam Anne-Marie Virolainen from Finland. Anne-Marie, you have the floor.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, thanks to Mr. Cottier for the excellent report. And I also want to thank Ms. Matviichuk for your emotional speech. Russia has violated international humanitarian law in its assault on sovereign Ukraine for almost a year. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians have died or been wounded in defense of their home country. Millions have been forced to either leave their homes or live in inhumane conditions with little water, heat, food or shelter, and with constant fear. Russia's atrocities are clear and conscious acts against humanity. Besides its illegal assault, genocide and war crimes, Putin's Russia poses also a threat to global security. By attacking Ukraine, it is attacking the world where people want to interact, compete and cooperate peacefully by common rules and mutual respect. Dear colleagues, the Russian Federation rhetoric against Ukraine probably incites genocide. All states party to the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide have duty to prevent and punish it. I strongly advocate the creation of a special international criminal tribunal for prosecuting the crimes Russia has committed in Ukraine. I call all states, international organizations and the whole international community to support the establishment of this tribunal. There is no other way for a more secure and just tomorrow than to identify and prosecute the responsible Russian political and military leaders for their war crimes. For this, I also strongly urge Member States to support the investigation of Russian war crimes against humanity and genocide by the ICC prosecutor. For a successful investigation, the Ukrainian authorities must be supported with sufficient resources and expertise. Finally, I want to reaffirm the call to set up an international compensation mechanism for repairing the damage caused to Ukraine and its citizens. As an organization for defending democracy, human rights and rule of law, the Council of Europe can be effectively lead its setup and management. Finally, it is our obligation to help people that have survived the hell and find the road to justice. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Next in the debate, I call Mr. Ahmet Yildiz from Turkey. Ahmet.
President, dear colleagues, Russia's unjustified war of aggression against Ukraine is about to enter second year, and there certainly does not appear to be an end in sight to this war. As the destruction continues, civilians are paying the highest price. Since October, we are witnessing indiscriminate and disproportionate attacks, civil missile strikes at multiple urban locations, especially targeting civilian infrastructure. And this continues with alarming frequency. In this regard, I thank the rapporteur for elaborating on how we could hold those responsible for atrocities to account. First and foremost, as suggested in the report, all relevant international conventions, in particular with regard to the protection of civilians, should be upheld, and all obligations under international human rights and humanitarian law must be respected. Allegations and some factual scenes about crimes perpetrated under the fog of war should be investigated, and the facts should be clearly established. This process should be transparent and credible. I would like to reiterate my support for a thorough inquiry into crimes committed during the conflict. Dear colleagues, as I explained in other meetings, that Turkey had tried to establish a long-term, comprehensive strategic relationship with Ukraine before this war of aggression. Unfortunately, this aggression happened. It couldn't be aborted. It couldn't be deterred by the international community. The conditions in the Black Sea, the Turkish geopolitical location, and international conditions put Turkey in a unique situation, in a unique position to do something that others cannot do. As a Black Sea riparian state and as responsible for implementation of the Montreal Convention, some of them are about these military things, some are about civilian aspects, such as helping manage this grain corridor, exchange of prisoners, maybe in the future about generation of power for the civilians, for the Ukrainian people. I am proud that Turkish diplomacy, military and political leadership plays this role in favor of Ukraine without forgetting that Russia is the aggressor, Ukraine is the victim. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Now we are going to listen to Mr. Paulo Pisco from Portugal. Paulo, you have the floor.
Also to Ms. Oleksandra Matviichuk for important speech and for the courageous work that she and the organization are doing. Colleagues, all the atrocities committed by Russian armies in Ukraine show with no doubt that human rights are being violated in all dimensions and that we are in face of all kinds of war crimes, from aggression to genocide, absolute lack of humanity, indiscriminate killings, destruction of entire cities, use of forbidden weapons, destruction, violence, torture, forcibly displaced children and helpless persons. The forced adoptions of children by Russian families and the process of Russification by deleting Ukrainian identities is an horrible crime that we should vehemently denounce. The absurd of the situation is that in spite of the huge amount of proofs and evidences of all kinds that are being collected by an important international coalition and several international courts, the Russian political and military perpetrators of all those crimes may not come to judgment and condemnation. So complex are the mechanisms of international justice. That possibility is a nightmare that should not happen. As it is totally absurd that in face of the tragedy of the war in Ukraine, the United Nations are blocked because of the veto power of Russia, something that is not tolerable for the future. In the barbaric war in Syria, Bashar al-Assad crossed the red line using chemical weapons, and nevertheless, he still lives in impunity, ruling the country, never being judged, what shows the limitations and constraints of international law and how the force of law became weaker and the world more unpredictable and dangerous. If after the war there will be no justice or unsatisfactory condemnations to all crimes committed, we will be hurting very badly the value of international law and all conventions that patiently we have been built along decades to bring civilization and humanity to the world. It is also a dangerous precedent because there's always countries that will feel more confident to aggress other nations and commit so many crimes as those that are now being committed by Russia. This report and its recommendations deserve full support of this chamber, but we also must appeal to the Council of Europe and to all international organizations to speed up this process and work for an international justice less complex, much faster and more effective to condemn war crimes and criminals, and therefore to contribute to build a new architecture of international justice for a world more fair, safe and free. Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo. Now we are going to listen to Madam Ingrid Schou from Norway. Ingrid, you have the floor.
President and colleagues, first of all, let me commend our rapporteur, Mr. Cottier, for having prepared a thorough report on an urgent matter. Russia must be held accountable for their aggression against Ukraine. The international community must come together to establish a special international tribunal. And President, nearly a year has passed since February 24, 2022. The Ukrainian people are having their lives ruined by war. They have suffered from the actions of their neighbors, not only since last year, but since 2014, when Crimea was illegally annexed. What we will examine today, though, it is how to hold Russia accountable for the act of aggression and how to ensure accountability for war crimes, crimes against humanity and possible genocide. After February the 24th, our Assembly was quick to act. Our organization, the Council of Europe, excluded a member. There was no doubt that Russia's actions were in breach of the statute of the Council of Europe. And President, when it comes to war, it is rarely as clear as it is now. Russia is the aggressor of the war. How can we hold Russia and the political and military leadership to account? Our international system of justice is not rigged for the situation we are in. Our organization, the OSCE, the United Nations, and many others of our multilateral structures were founded in the wake of the Second World War. They were established to prevent history to repeat itself, prevent another world war, for humankind to live in peace with their human rights respected. Now we are in the situation where one of the victors of 1945 is the aggressor. An aggressor with a seat in the United Nations Security Council, blocking prosecution through the International Criminal Court. And President, Mr. Cottier's elaborations on how a special tribunal can be set up and how international crimes committed in Ukraine can be investigated and prosecuted is therefore commendable. When we adopt this draft resolution, we will give a strong signal to our governments to move forward to establish the special tribunal, to make sure that heinous crimes committed in Ukraine is not only investigated but also prosecuted, to make sure that aggressors and perpetrators are held accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. Prochain orateur est Monsieur.
Next speaker is Mr. Henri Gatolin from France. André, you have the floor. Thank you, President. Dear colleagues, first of all, President, my thanks for the invitation extended to Oleksandra to speak here. Madame, I can tell you how important it is to us to hear from you, because you have been a defender of the people who have suffered, and to know more, to hear about the terrible things those people have suffered, and to know what you feel about this, to have this extra information. My congratulations to you and your organization. And I think you certainly deserve the Nobel Peace Prize. And I think you have suffered now thousands of war crimes. As you said, it was recalled just a few moments ago by our Greek colleague. There are wars against and crimes against humanity, which is difficult to find out about. We're thinking here about the massive deportation of people to territories annexed or occupied by the Russian Federation. Thousands of people being forced to either leave their families, sometimes orphans, but also people who are forced to move to the territory of the Russian Federation, and special decrees are issued so they can be adopted. And this can be found in the propaganda of the Kremlin. We have to think about who these people are. Sometimes we read in the newspapers just what's happening. These are special decrees. And supposedly to denazify the country, these children are supposed to be de-Ukrained. They're supposed to become good Russians. We think about what's happened to the Uyghurs in China. This is the scandal. There are hundreds of thousands of such cases, which will be difficult to investigate fully. But the authorities responsible for this, the civil and other authorities, will have to account for this. This situation is abominable because they correspond to the crime of genocide. And I say this advisedly. These are terrible things. We think about the fight against ethnic groups, and if we hear about the so-called genocides against the Russian-speaking population, we're witnessing mass destruction of a culture and children being deported, because these are not forced displacements. When you move across a border, these are deportations. So we must talk about those issues as well. And of course, I'll conclude by underscoring the excellent work done by our rapporteur, Damien Cotier, whom I fully support. And I hope that we will vote unanimously in the Heads of State and Government meeting in Reykjavik will support this, and that our Human Rights Commissioner in this institution, who's sometimes a little too quiet, will speak out fully on this. Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrei.
Going to listen to Mr. Oleksij Goncharenko from Ukraine. Oleksij, you have the floor.
Dear colleagues, many of you here in couloirs, you ask me, how is life in Ukraine now? I want to show you. First, remember please, how did you wake up this morning? Remembered? I want to show you how Ukrainians woke up this morning. Millions of Ukrainians, including my children, woke up like this morning, and many mornings during this almost 1 year, and new victims already in Ukraine. And we are meeting here for the 5th time from the start of this awful war, aggression, invasion, and Ukraine continues to bleed. Yes, we need new Nuremberg against new Nazis, yes, but first, to may have a Nuremberg, Nazis should be defeated. Before Nuremberg happened, Nazis were defeated in 20th century. And before new Nuremberg will happen, new Nazis should be defeated. That's the first thing. That's why, when here was Minister Baerbock, and she said, it's not a good place to speak about weaponry, when we asked her several times. We're here for peace and justice. But you can't achieve peace without weaponry today, because there is war. You can't achieve peace by demilitarizing, like we're making recommendations and resolutions today. Yes, we are very thankful for all tanks we received. Finally, there is this decision. Thanks for tanks. Danke schön. But before the start of the invasion, Russia had more than 13,000 tanks. 13,000. You can't stop Russian tanks by recommendations, words, resolutions, and other things. You need tanks, and not 12, not 31, not 50. And today the dove of peace is F-16 for Ukraine, is Gripen for Ukraine, is the fighters for Ukraine. So we should do this now. Now. The winter is not coming. Winter already is here. And if we want peace now in Europe, everybody, I invite you to come to Ukraine. All those politicians in Europe who were not in Ukraine for the moment, I think you are not right. You should come and see everything by your own eyes. No resolutions but weaponry. No speaking but weaponry. No debates but weaponry. Weaponry today to stop the evil. And after this, new Nuremberg. Thank you.
Thank you, Oleksij. Next in the debate, I call Mr. Indrek Saar from Estonia. Indrek, you have the floor.
Dear colleagues, I'm sure that no one in this hall remains unconvinced that Russia's leadership is a hotbed of imperialist ambitions, and that it is ready to reach its goals by any means available. by violating agreements, lying, torturing and killing innocent people. We might think that after February 24, this has become so painfully obvious that no one could overlook this. But sadly, this is not the case. The Russian regime has got away with lying to its people for decades. And this huge country has an incredible number of people who have swallowed these lies hook, line and sinker. This means, for example, that many generations have grown up in the knowledge that Second World War, or the Great Patriotic War, as it is called in Russia, was the noble liberation mission of the Russian nation to clean the world of evil. The fact that while doing this, the Russian soldiers raped and butchered their way through Europe with the same savagery that we have now seen in Bucha, Irpin, Mariupol, and in many places in Ukraine, is something that most of the Russians have never, ever been forced to acknowledge. Sad to say that most of the people in Russia have never needed to accept any shame for the fact that their country violently stripped large numbers of Europeans of their opportunity to live in a free society, or that millions of people were deported from their homes, their lives were crashed, because they never faced the truth. This list could go on, and we could all add a multiple of examples on how Russia has systematically crushed human rights and international agreements which hold up the civilized world. If we want the world order to continue resting on international agreements, we need to finally hold the aggressor accountable. All of Russia, from its leaders down to every simple, hard-working citizen, must realize that everyone is accountable for their actions, and these actions have been unforgivable. We need to be able to tell the truth in a way that reaches every individual. We need to do it for ourselves and for every Russian. Only then will there be hope for Russia as well. This is why we must establish an international special tribunal as soon as possible, and to enforce the compensation mechanism for all the material and moral damages that Russia has caused to Ukraine and to the Ukrainian people. I thank the rapporteur and everyone who has contributed to this topic.
Thank you.
The resulting report is a step in the right direction. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Indrek. Now we are going to listen to Mr. Sergei Sobolev from Ukraine. Sergei, you have the floor.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, I want to thank the rapporteur for this excellent document, because it's not only a document, it's really a new history that you started to write together with us. And it's very important to have correct definitions in this history. And you did it as a rapporteur, and I thank all others who make their excellent work to have the excellent report in this meaning. What kind of definitions? It's not war in Ukraine. It's the Russian aggression against Ukraine. It's very important that we have this definition. It's not like a war. It's an exact date of this war and Russian aggression against Ukraine. It's the February of 2014. And second, it's February of 2022. It's very important to understand this, because without these definitions we can't do another work. The work for future special tribunal. It's very important to understand that it's not only war crimes that we analyzed on previous days, sexual war crimes, but it's as well a war crimes of the army of Putin, and as well of his private army, Wagner troops. It's very important that we also have this in this report. This report is maybe only the beginning of future reports where we need to analyze step by step what we had to do in the 21st century to analyze how it's possible that new fascist regime who are sitting in this building together with us, who are now still try to protect them on different international organizations, including United Nations organization. We need to define all this. This report is a very excellent report also because it's a good way for NATO countries, for European Union, and maybe for United Nations organization, how to analyze and to stop the future wars. I think all this together gives us an excellent mechanism how to prevent war and how to stop war. Because war did not start in Ukraine. It started in Georgia in 2008, and we must understand that we do not stop this war this time. I think that this report, it's only the beginning, but good beginning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergei. Now I call on debate Mr. Kimmo Kiljunen from Finland. Kimmo.
Mr. President, we are having here just now an exceptionally important discussion, the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Thanks very much, Madam Oleksandra Matviichuk, for your very strong, valuable and even emotionally touching speech. Thank you very much indeed. You noted that the war which Russia is carrying in Ukraine, Russia is committed many very serious war crimes. And you requested us to consider seriously that we need a special international tribunal to address this. I fully agree. I fully agree. This type of war crimes Russia is now committing cannot be without consequences. As you stated, there is no peace without justice. You also said Putin is not afraid of NATO. Putin is afraid of democracy. Indeed. Indeed. Putin is afraid of democracy, which means that he is actually afraid of his own people, his own people's aspirations and rights for democracy, human rights and rule of law. That's what he is battling. That's what he is afraid. And the democratic will of Ukrainian, similar way like the democratic will of Belarusian people, is the threat. So we can say actually that Ukrainians are not fighting only for their national existence and sovereignty and preserving their own democratic system, but they are also fighting for the Russian people's right for democracy. Lord Edward Leich for EC Group started his presentation here and said that the Ukrainian war ends the Russians' imperial dreams. I also agree with that one. This war is an obsolete. It belongs to the last century. Exactly, this is the last battle of collapse of Soviet Union, which has actually gone on these battles on the former Soviet Union regions 30 years. We know, and you have listed them very many times here. Mr. Vladimir Putin stated in his speech for Nation 2005, saying that the biggest geopolitical catastrophe was the collapse of Soviet Union, which obviously implied that the imperial dream was behind. Mr. Brzezinski has noted Russia without Ukraine is not anymore imperial, and that's now actually fact. The national identity of Ukraine is the highest ever. Unfortunately, I would say so, the biggest geopolitical catastrophe wasn't actually the collapse of the Soviet Union, but it never materialized President Gorbachev's dreams about common European home. That obviously is the aim.
Thank you, Kimmo. Now in the debate I call Madam Marija Mazensova from Ukraine. Maria, you have the floor.
Well, dear President, thank you very much. I would like to start my speech from a very important citation. A true soldier is fighting not something which is in front of him or her, because he fears. He or she fights something for what he loves at the back of him or her. And colleagues, as a representative of Ukrainian delegation, I would love to tell you that it's not the infrastructure we're fighting daily for. It's not the buildings, it's not the roads. It's our heritage, our genetical code, which is freedom, our people, and our history. This is a red line we're approaching daily time while hearing the sirens, while receiving text messages of the wounded and dead soldiers, men and women, who are, as of now, standing in Bakhmut, Soledar, and many hotspots of this bleeding but still beating war. I want to let you know that will be having more and more resolutions approaching on deported Ukrainians, which Mr. Pisko will be working on. The numbers are growing. We don't know where our citizens exactly are, but we have one goal, as President Zelensky always says, to bring back everyone home. And I want to congratulate everyone who already did so and came to Ukraine. But I want to pay the tribute to the brilliant work of the rapporteur, of the committee, and everyone who visited us, not only in summer, but through all this time. You are continuing to be the soldiers. I was referring to it at the very beginning of my speech. The soldiers of the diplomatic battle, which is continuing today. And colleagues, this file would have never happened, and we would have never been talking about a new mechanism, special tribunal for the repeated crime of aggression, if not a small but very, very important amendment we passed with you back in March in the report when we excluded Russia because they do not fulfill even one adequate position from what we all believe in this House. The Council of Europe was created to prevent the wars, to prevent genocides, to prevent erasure of nations. But as of now, we, as the true soldiers of diplomacy, have to fight and create new mechanisms to respond to this brutal war, which could have overlapped further to Europe, if not the resistance within Ukraine. Colleagues, today many cities of Ukraine were hit again, and there are dead and wounded people. I want to tell you a huge thank you for everything you're doing at your national parliaments, in your homes, in your constituencies. Please continue to stand with Ukraine, because we stand for you every second back home.
Thank you, Marija. Le dernier orateur dans...
The last speaker will be Mr. Bertrand Bouix for France. Bertrand, please. Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, I'd like first of all to welcome the excellence of the work done by our rapporteur and all the work that the committee has done on that report. Human rights violations happen on a daily basis in Ukraine. They are perpetrated by regular Russian forces, but also by private militia, particularly the Wagner militia, whose sinister exploits are talked about every day in the country and elsewhere. The Russian Federation has made itself guilty of abuses whose atrocity is a violation of the conscience and our very conception of life and human dignity. These abuses of all types, I've already expressed them here, are war crimes or crimes against humanity, call for condemnation by international justice. The French delegation, which I had, has had the honor of receiving a Ukrainian delegation at the National Assembly. It was led by Ms. Merceta at our Senate, but also at our Senate, to talk about constituting a crime of aggression, which would cover all of the different crimes which Ukraine has endured since February 24, 2022. And I'd like to say again here what we collectively said to our Ukrainian colleagues then. That meeting was the occasion for an exchange on the creation of an international criminal tribunal, which would be of a special nature to sanction the diverse abuses committed by the Russian Federation on Ukrainian territory. We support without reservation the principle of judging those responsible for the crimes, whatever means are chosen to arrive at that end. In fact, The fact that neither Russia nor Ukraine be parties to the Rome Statute, which created the ICC, means that it will perhaps be necessary to explore ways and means for the creation of an ad hoc tribunal. Last November 30th, the French National Assembly supported this position by voting for a resolution calling on the, and I quote, European Union and its member states to continue to unreservedly support the ICC in its work doing inquiries on all possible war crimes or crimes against humanity committed on Ukrainian territory since the beginning of the aggression, so that the guilty parties in such crimes might be judged by the ICC or, if necessary, by an ad hoc tribunal following the conflict. The French government has already decided to deploy an inquiry force from the French National Gendarmerie in the Izum region. And I would like to welcome that commitment made by our National Gendarmerie. We need to continue collecting and preserving on the ground all evidence concerning war crimes and crimes against humanity. I'd like to repeat what Mr. Garlick said, that we must have our Human Rights Commissioner take a hand in this situation, and it is by bringing about justice for victims and sanctioning the perpetrators that our continent will go back to finding peace, lasting peace. France and its parliament are ready to support any steps taken in that direction, and I thank you. Thank you, Bertrand.
I have to interrupt the list of speakers, but bear in mind that the speeches of those members on the speakers list, and there are still a lot of them, who have been present during the debate but have not been able to speak, may be given to the table office for publication in our official report. I remind colleagues that typewritten text must be submitted electronically no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. I now call Mr. Gautier, the rapporteur, to reply. You have 3 minutes, Damien.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, President. And I am pleased that the debate ends with that very strong statement from the French delegation, echoing many of the important statements made here the other day, the Foreign Minister of Germany and the Dutch government not so long ago, and the President of the European Commission a few days ago, and many national governments calling for the creation of this international court for the crime of aggression, which we have already unanimously supported during the April debate. Mr. Goncharenko, you have had us hear the air raid sirens, and a delegation that went in June actually heard them as well in the middle of a discussion with the foreign minister, and we had to move quickly. And I'm from Switzerland, a country which has known peace for many decades, so it's very destabilizing to hear sirens. And in discussing with the population and with you, the members of the Ukrainian delegation, we understood how this has become part of your daily lives, as you said this morning. And people are waking up to those noises. And yesterday I heard on the radio that the first word a little boy said yesterday was bomb instead of mum or dad. And that is what children wake up to. And we in our delegation were struck by the extent to which the Ukrainian people is resilient and it wants to live normally, notwithstanding these bombs raining down on them every day and the air raid sirens that keep ringing. We have to keep this up because it's a fight for freedom. You refer to military aspects. And as Sir Edward Lee said earlier, that's not the subject matter in this chamber. That is not within the purview of the Council of Europe. Of course, those discussions have to happen, but they need to happen in other fora, and we well understand your intention, because if Ukraine halts fighting, there will be no Ukraine left. If Russia stops, then there'll be no war anymore. And that's what we're calling on Russia to do. But as Mrs. Mezensova said and others said on the question of justice, we need to build peace, first of all. And there are 3 pillars for that peace. I thank you all in the groups: the reparation mechanism, compensation mechanism, the support for the authorities, particularly the ICC,
and the criminal justice authorities in Ukraine in order to ensure that justice is done on these war crimes, crimes against humanity and possible genocide crimes, and also addressing this issue of the crime of aggression. Mr. Katrin, it shouldn't weaken the ICC. On the contrary, we must work very, very closely with it, and that mechanism should dovetail with the ICC, because we know the ICC doesn't have a mandate for this, and of course the countries have to sign and ratify the Rome Statute and the Kampala amendments, but that needs to be as a supplement to the creation of this international special court. So thank you to all the political groups for supporting the proposals in this report. As Ms. Jakobsdóttir said, it's a roadmap to justice. And I just want to refer what Matviichuk said, and I thank her again for her poignant testimony to conclude.
Because it is the right thing to do. Avez-vous dit, nous devons le faire.
Said we must do it because it's the right thing to do. And let us now vote and send a clear message to Reykjavik and the heads of state and government when they meet there. Thank you. Thank you, Rapporteur.
The Vice Chairperson of the Committee, Mr. Davor Ivo Stier, wishes to speak. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues, dear Oleksandra. Let me start by thanking the rapporteur for his work, as well as the Secretariat for their dedication. This report is based on a motion for a resolution tabled on the 17th of March 2022, the day after the expulsion of the Russian Federation from the Council of Europe. Now, the Committee on Legal Affairs has examined already some of the aspects covered by this report in an urgent debate report on the Russian Federation's aggression, ensuring accountability for the serious violation of international humanitarian law and other international crimes, which was prepared by Alexander Poche as rapporteur in April 2022. At that time, the Assembly unanimously called for the establishment of a special tribunal on the crime of aggression committed against Ukraine. And let's not forget, this Assembly was the first international body to do so. The current report, prepared by our chairman, Damien Coutier, develops the proposal in more detail and recommends concrete action to Member States, the Council of Europe, and other international actors. It also deals with 2 other key aspects of the accountability for the violations of international law. And one is the accountability for other international crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. And the second one is the compensation for all the damage and loss resulting from the Russian aggression against Ukraine. After 3 hearings with experts on the 3 different topics, the committee asked the Bureau to fast-track the report and examine it under the urgent debate procedure. We consider that the Assembly should send a strong and unified message to our heads of state and governments meeting in Reykjavik in May. This week, we heard from the Secretary General of the Council of Europe that the organization was ready to play its part and contribute to ensure accountability, and that the aggression against Ukraine will be at the center of the summit. So, dear colleagues, with this resolution, supported unanimously by our committee on Tuesday, the Assembly will send a clear message to the world. The serious violations of international law committed by Russia and its leaders against one of our member states will not go unpunished. Peace can only be achieved through justice and accountability. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stier. The debate is closed now. The Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights has presented a draft resolution which you find in document 15689, to which 7 amendments have been tabled. We will also consider 3 sub-amendments. I remind you that speeches on amendments are limited to 30 seconds. I understand that the Vice Chairperson of the Committee of Legal Affairs and Human Rights wishes to propose to the Assembly that amendments 5 and 6 to the draft resolution, which were unanimously approved by the committee, should be declared as agreed by the Assembly. Is that so, Mr. Stier?
Yeah, that's correct.
Does anybody object? I don't see so. That means that amendments 5 and 6 to the draft resolution have been agreed. I also understand that the Vice Chairperson of the committee wishes to propose to the Assembly that the amendments 1, 2 and 3 to the draft resolution, which were rejected by the committee with a 2/3 majority be declared as rejected by the Assembly. Is that so, Mr. Stier?
Is correct.
Is there any objection? I do not see so. As there is no objection, I declare that amendments 1, 2 and 3 to the draft resolution are rejected. I now call Madam Céline Sayek-Beuke to support amendment number 7. Céline, you have 30 seconds. I do not see her here. Is there anybody else who wants to move amendment number 7? Madam Schouw, perhaps amendment number 7 has. Would you move it formally, perhaps?
I do not have the text in front of me, so but then I have moved it, so you can vote on it.
The amendment is moved formally, so we can take it into account. Does anybody wish? No. I have been informed that Mr. Cotier, the rapporteur, wishes to propose an oral sub-amendment as follows: replace the word procedures with all the relevant procedures and delete all the text in the parentheses. The amendment would then read as follows: the Assembly also calls on the Ukrainian authorities to put particular emphasis on activating all the relevant procedures to gather information on and ensure the safe return of forcefully transferred Ukrainian children from the Russian Federation and the Russian occupied territories. In my opinion, the oral sub-amendment is in order under our rules. However, if 10 or more members object, the oral sub-amendment being debated, I do not see any objection. Then I ask Mr. Cotier to support his oral sub-amendment. Damien?
Oui, merci, Monsieur.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. First of all, just now, please forget me having forgotten when I moved the amendment. I wanted to say a word to thank the Secretariat, in particular, Katrin, for the excellent work has been done supporting the committee and its rapporteur. It was a great privilege to work in such conditions. Concerning the sub-amendment, we simply need to make things a bit clearer because some of the institutions that have been cited here are not cited with sufficient precision and others are cited in great detail. So I think it's better to talk about all the necessary procedures so as to be precise in our text.
To the oral sub-amendment, you don't see any objection. What is the opinion of the mover of the amendment, Madam Schouw?
I agree.
Thank you very much. The committee is obviously in favor, Mr. Stier. I now will put the sub-amendment, the oral sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. And the oral sub-amendment is carried. We will now consider the main amendment as amended. Does anybody wish to speak against the amendment as amended? I do not see any. The committee is obviously in favor, Mr. Stier. I now shall put amendment number 7 as amended to the floor. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. The amendment is carried. Which page? We now move to amendment number 4 and an oral sub-amendments to it. I call Mr. Vasilenko to support amendment number 4. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Chair. This amendment regards the recommendations of the Assembly to unblock the United Nations and the Security Council, which today is paralyzed by the veto power of Russia's Federation. And essentially, what we are saying is that we want the UN to return to a rule-based society and the International Court of Justice to give its opinion juris on the matter. So I ask to support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Lecia. I have been informed that Mr. Coutier, rapporteur, wishes to propose 2 oral sub-amendments which have to be dealt with separately. We will now consider the oral sub-amendment 1 to amendment number 4. The first oral sub-amendment would delete the second sentence of amendment 4. In my opinion, this oral sub-amendment is in order under our rules. However, if 10 or more members do object to it to be debated, I do not see. So then I call on Mr. Coutier to support sub-amendment 1 to amendment 4. Damien.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. What this amendment says is fair, and the grave problem in the UN Security Council is a serious one, but we don't think it's for the Council of Europe to propose how another international organization should reform itself, and the appeal for a change is sufficient elsewhere in the text, so we think it's better to delete this sentence, which refers to a different international organization to ours. And our remit is to deal with the issues in our organization. We can appeal to states, but not another organization such as the UN.
To speak against the oral sub-amendment, I do not see any. What is the committee is obviously in favor, Mr. Steer, of the oral sub-amendment, so I will now put it to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed, and the oral sub-amendment is carried. We now will consider the oral sub-amendment number 2 to amendment 2. I have been informed that Mr. Coutier wishes to propose an oral sub-amendment as follows. Leave out in the last sentence from as well to Estonia and Poland. In my opinion, the oral sub-amendment is in order under our rules. However, if 10 or more members object, the oral sub-amendment to be debated, not the case, then I call Mr. Coutier to support his oral sub-amendment number 2.
Mr. President, this is a legally not very contestable issue. The succession of USSR by the Russian Federation has been accepted by the international community by more than 30 years, and the chances of success of such a way forward are extremely weak, and we do not feel that the Assembly's strength will be enhanced by going forward with this. We would suggest, therefore, we limit ourselves to the opinion of the ICC, but not add this dimension of the succession of states. Thank you.
Against this oral sub-amendment, I do not see what is the opinion of the mover of the amendment. Lecia?
Merci, je suis d'accord avec le...
Thank you. I agree with the sub-amendment as we have discussed it in the committee.
Favor? In favor. Thank you very much. The committee, obviously, Mr. Steer, is in favor of the sub-amendment. I will now put oral sub-amendment number 2 to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed, and the oral sub-amendment is carried. We will now consider the main amendment as amended. Does anybody wishes to speak against the main amendment as amended? Do not see. The committee, Mr. Steer, is obviously in favor. I now shall put amendment number 4 as amended to the vote. The vote is open. Well done. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed, and the amendment number 4 is carried. We now will proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 15689 as amended. A simple majority is required. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed, and the resolution has been adopted unanimously. Thank you very much, and also thank you very much, Madam Oleksandra Matviichuk, for participating, not only addressing our assembly, but also participating in the debate. And congratulations, Mr. Rapporteur. We will wait a few moments, and then we are going to listen to the address of the Prime Minister of Iceland, chairing the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe.